Hello and welcome to today's webinar titled Are You Ahead or Behind? Research Findings on Application Security in DevOps. So over to the next slide. This webinar is brought to you by Hewlett Packard Enterprises and enabled by Vivid. For those of you who are new to Vivid, Vivid is a volunteer-based HPE software user group. Can I encourage you to have a look at the Vivid website, and please, and a big thank you to HPE for this event. So my name is Stevan Jovanovic. I'm the delivery director for a company called Infuse Consulting, and we're a technical testing specialist services company. And part of my interest is, particularly in this webinar, is on how to involve security testing early in the process, and particularly the development process. So I'm really looking forward to this, and it should be a really interesting webinar. My role in Vivid is as the UK Agile Chapter Lead. And I'm working very closely with the Vivid board to look at organising some Agile specific events, particularly in the UK. If you are from the UK listening on to this and you are interested in getting involved, please get hold of me through the Vivid website. And now over to the main event for this afternoon. And I'd like to introduce our speaker for today, and that person is Cindy Blake. Cindy is a thought leader currently focused on integrating security into DevOps. She is working to bring together the strengths of the application SDLC tools and application security tools to propel customers in their quest for rapid development and deployment without compromising security. And I hope you're all welcome, Cindy. So over to some housekeeping. This is a live session, and it is being recorded, and recordings will be available to all Vivid members after the event. It takes about 24 hours for the recordings to come live. The other part, and this is particularly important right now, is questions. Cindy is very keen to hear questions from the floor. We have time at the end to go through them. And I would encourage you to type in your questions. If we move on to the next and final slide, which is just to introduce you to the webinar control panel. Towards the bottom of the panel, you'll see a questions panel. If you pull that out and type in your questions in there, we will look through all of them, and we will look to make time to answer questions at the end of this session. So thank you for your patience, and bless you, and straight over to Cindy.
Great, thank you, Stefan. So I put together a bit of an agenda to explain what we're going to cover in today's webinar. So we're going to look at the research to help you determine if you're ahead or behind, but we're also going to separate the buzz from what people are actually doing. And then we'll look at how you can use this information, providing some practical examples on how to apply it. But first, I thought it would be good if we started with a polling question. So if we can, Stefan, if you can go to the polling question, I want to see how we stack up among participants in today's webinar.
Okay, so for everybody on the webinar, please take an active part in this. The poll question is, what percentage of your company's application portfolio uses DevOps processes? And we've got 5 options. Please select one of them, and that's none, less than 25%, 26 to 75%, more than 75%, and all. And please take an active part.
I'm anxious to see, everybody on the call has a common interest in this topic. I'm anxious to see how many folks on the call are actually using DevOps.
Okay.
So how's it looking, Stefan?
At the moment, so at the moment we're looking. We've got a good set of responses. I'll just give it another 10-20 seconds to allow people just to make a final parts. We have had one question about the polling question, which is, what does DevOps processes mean? We don't have integrated processes.
That's the $64 million question. It's entirely up to your interpretation.
Lovely, thank you. I hope that's clarified it. And I think we've had enough respondents, so what we'll do is close the poll at this point. So the polling results, going in order, so none was 21%, less than 25% is 36%, 26 to 75% is 36%, more than 75% is 7, and all is 0.
Okay.
So, thank you, Cindy. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Stefan. So that's really in line with the research and what we found. It's still very early for most, and most are kind of dabbling in it or have partitioned some of their applications, but not the entire portfolio. So if you were feeling like you were the only one not doing DevOps, those 21%, you're not alone. So let's look first at what led us to do the research in the first place. And for that, I think it starts with some context. If you can understand a bit of history about application security and the state of application security, I think it will help you understand why this research was so important. The vast majority of security spending is still focused on blocking things on the network. It's a hard infrastructure perimeter, and also in searching for malware or viruses throughout the network. And all these existing defenses are effective for what they're designed to protect, but they're really insufficient for blocking threats against applications. And with the majority of breaches targeting the application layer, you can begin to understand the problem. We have insecure software, and billions of dollars are being spent to block kind of an old paradigm in terms of a fixed perimeter, to the tune of about 23-to-1 between, in favor of old school protections versus application security. To further compound the problem, the number and complexity of applications is growing. So 10 years ago, the software security challenge was about protecting static websites that were fairly innocuous and easy to scope and to protect. But now the software supply chain is so much more complicated. You've got to consider outsourced development, legacy applications, in-house development, and then you've got third-party, open source, commercial off-the-shelf software. So in the context of this really complicated software supply chain and how modern applications are built, the security threat becomes even more complex to tackle for most security organizations. And now you compound this with the speed of DevOps. So our own research found that businesses believe that by 2020, IT will need to be releasing 30 times more frequently per application per year in order to just keep up with enabling the business innovation that's demanded. So we can't create this level of improvement just by doing the same thing we've been doing it, but doing it faster. We really have to change our systems, our goals, our tools, everything in order to meet the requirements of business innovation. And this is putting further pressure on our ability to secure applications. Security teams can't keep up just by doing the same thing faster either. So we conducted this study to understand the state of DevOps and how people think about security within DevOps. So there's a lot of hype about DevOps. Everybody's talking about it, but what are people actually doing, and how are they actually integrating security or not? So to do this study, we used a third party, and they recruited and screened participants. We only wanted to talk with folks that were claimed to actually be doing DevOps. And back to the polling question point, is that's open to interpretation. And the interviews were conducted as qualitative research, and they were blinded. The interviewees didn't know that HPE was the one that was asking the questions. So let's look at the key takeaways. And to do that, first we're going to look at the DevOps side of it, and then we'll look at the security side of it. So most are really early in their DevOps journey. The most challenging aspects were also the most beneficial. Automation, continuous delivery, continuous integration. But all of these take a lot of work to fully implement. And DevOps solves one of the biggest problems for developers, and that is time to delivery. So, but at the same time, operations sees it a little bit more, sees DevOps as a little bit more of a burden to implement and potentially a threat, when you look at automated infrastructure deployment and that sort of thing. So they don't always see eye to eye. On the tools side, there's tools like Atlassian and Microsoft Team Foundation Server, Git, Jenkins, Puppet, those things that have really strong associations with DevOps and are really kind of a leading indicator of where people are on their DevOps journey. So let's look a little bit deeper at some of these things. So if all the buzz makes you feel like you're behind the DevOps movement, you're really not. The average enterprise is still moving from waterfall to agile and from agile to DevOps, and they're using DevOps only for a select portion of their applications, typically not for their entire portfolio. The exceptions to that would be the organizations that are sort of quote-unquote born into DevOps, so they're newer, they're only online, they don't have the legacy, and they're doing mostly software development as opposed to third-party apps. There are some defining characteristics that sort of bubble to the top. So the way we did the interviews, we showed the interviewees a list of typical DevOps processes, and we asked which ones they were doing and what tools they were using for each. And through a combination of looking at how often they mentioned things and digging through the comments and whatnot, we were able to identify a handful of things that we would characterize as more advanced DevOps, and that set some folks apart from the others. And I will have to say, one thing about the research itself was kind of telling. We said we only wanted to talk to people that were doing DevOps, and when we did the screening, they said they were doing DevOps, but when we dug in and really looked at what processes they were using around continuous deployment, continuous integration, automation, a lot of them weren't using any of those. So there's a disconnect between people that identify with, hey, we're doing DevOps, and what they're actually doing. And we had to go back and really dig hard to find people that were along that more advanced spectrum of DevOps. So one of the key objectives, though, that I think was a common denominator is trying to speed deployment cycles. So everyone was kind of going with that objective in mind, and some of the more advanced areas usually included automation and continuous integration or continuous deployment of the applications. Another key thing was that some were finding that tools like Chef and Puppet are harder implement than they thought. Another kind of common denominator here is that it's really about an evolution, not a revolution. So continuous integration, continuous deployment may be the brass ring, but really few have fully achieved it. Taking it at their own pace. So each enterprise typically has their own unique set of objectives, and they pick and choose which DevOps processes they want to implement that will best meet those objectives. So there's definitely not a one-size-fits-all, and there's no standard methodology that everyone uses. And you can't say if you're doing A, or A, B, and C, then you're doing DevOps. It's not quite so clear-cut. The other key point here is that in order to fully implement DevOps, so if you wanted to have continuous deployment, you really need to have that cloud-like environment where you can spin up infrastructure on the fly. And typically that's called software-defined infrastructure. There were a lot of people that were doing DevOps that were not familiar with the concept. So I think this piece is still early in addition. And there's a difference in perspectives around software-defined infrastructure when you look at whether you're talking to the developers or they're not necessarily on the same page here. And in fact, this difference in perspectives really extends beyond the infrastructure. There are many challenges when you look at bringing Dev and Ops together into DevOps, and cultural barriers, change in of itself, and also tools. Tools is an issue also because there's just too many of them, and there's not a real good standardization there. So let's dig in and look at tools a little bit more. In general, people were satisfied with their tools, but they're not really fully leveraging them. But it's still early. Now, there were a couple of de facto standards. So Git was a de facto standard. Jenkins was kind of right behind Git in popularity. TeamCity is also popular, as well as the Atlassian tools. And Chef and Puppet are popular among those practicing continuous deployment, but continuous deployment's not really a universal objective. And then lastly, the Hpe Enterprise tools were mentioned most for testing, monitoring, and security. You might ask too why the tools are important and why it was important that we look at those. If you think about the DevOps tool chain and all of the ecosystem of the tools that have to be used, to the extent that they can be seamless and facilitate the process, that's an important aspect. And so understanding which ones are key is really a key takeaway there. So let's look at the takeaways around application security and DevOps. So the first one here is really the most surprising. So most said that their applications were secure because they had access control. But application security is so much more than access control, and it's much more than protecting the code itself. It's really about preventing hackers, insiders, and others from manipulating the software, usually through malicious inputs, to cause it to serve up sensitive data or behave in a way that's not intended by the enterprise. So it could result in leaking sensitive data. It could result in following processes that were not intended. For instance, if you have a process control application and you're monitoring actual physical things like a water company would or a power plant, if those applications get hacked, it can cause all kinds of disruptions to your ability to deliver water and power and other things. So it really can, applications are the heart of the business and what you do. So it's fundamental that everyone, developers, operations, executives, everyone really understands that network security is not equipped to understand what's happening within the application. So another popular tool that was mentioned is a web application firewall, commonly known as a WAF. So WAFs interpret an application's behavior based on what they see across the wire, but there's a lack of accuracy and insight, and that's why WAFs are usually used in a non-blocking mode or only for very specific threats. So without that application security, organizations are really running blind. And I'm going to cover more about what you can do when we look at what you can do with these findings. Second one here is everyone really cares about security, but everyone is not taking responsibility for their role in how they could potentially impact it. And security needs to be embedded within development and testing and deployment and production, and everyone really has a role there. And so understanding your role and what you can do to contribute and making sure that you've got the tools and equipment to do that is really a key piece here. Security hasn't been well integrated into DevOps. So there's a term, SecDevOps, DevSecOps, whatever. There's all kinds of terms out there that people are bantering around, and there's an argument over whether security is a barrier or an enabler to DevOps, and whether DevOps will increase or decrease the security of an application. But only by building it into your processes can you really assess the impact and continually improve the outcome, just as you would with any other process. And lastly, application security tools, they're not real well known. Now, this isn't surprising given the misunderstanding of what application security is in the first place, but most rely on perimeter security and third parties, especially for penetration testing. And so the risk here is real when you look at combining DevOps into the mix. Manual penetration just really doesn't scale, and it can't be done at DevOps speed. So if you're trying to release, trying to move from releasing yearly, semi-annually to monthly to weekly, daily, that sort of thing, you just can't pen test everything on that in terms of that scale and that speed. So just like actually, just like two women can't have a baby in 4.5 months, pen testing can't be, sped up to simply meet the faster release cycles. So if you're not automating your security testing and not adding protections in production, your application security just isn't going to keep up with DevOps. So there is a real problem here, and we've looked at some of the research. What I've shared so far is the qualitative research that we did with the interviews. And we followed this up with quantitative research via a survey. And so I want to invite you, the survey is still open for a week or so, I want to invite you to jump on to SurveyMonkey and contribute your thoughts. Vivit's going to distribute the link, but here it is for your convenience. And I want to transition to how you can take this research and take action on it. But before I do, I want to remind you, this might be a good point if you've got some questions about the research, be sure and type them into the question manager here in the webcast, and we'll get to those at the end. I want to remind you, though, while it's fresh on your mind. So let's look at how you can take the information that's shared and translate that into action. So I think we've made the point that a reactive approach just isn't going to work in a DevOps environment. The other point here about that is it's really not cost effective to do so. And research has shown that it's 30 times more expensive to fix software after it's deployed than to do it earlier on. So it's really best to start with security in mind from the beginning, build it in, enable your developers to eliminate vulnerabilities right up front, and that's going to save you downstream effort Think of it as for every vulnerability that's eliminated in development, that's one less that has to be tested, audited, remediated, and so forth downstream. So let's look at building it in. I mentioned building it into development. You really want to build it in along your entire software development lifecycle. So the way to do this is to think about shifting left, eliminating really defects, software defects. You can look at security vulnerabilities in that regard. Eliminating those defects early, so in development. Also in security testing through automation. So automating as much of that process as you can so that it's not a manual step in a well-oiled process, well-oiled DevOps process. It needs to be baked in and automated just as any other parts of the SDLC. And then in the production side, you can take steps to continuously monitor and protect your applications so that if you've missed some vulnerabilities in development, missed them in testing, or maybe you've chosen to move them into production anyway because you'll remediate them on the next sprint, you just got to get on and get the application deployed, you need compensating controls to monitor those vulnerabilities for exploit and take action if they're exploited. That's a key piece, not only for custom developed applications, but for third-party applications as well, because you might have vulnerabilities that the software vendor wrote into the code, but you don't have access to the code to remediate it yourself. So you're really at the vendor's mercy in terms of waiting for that patch. And that compensating control can help manage and reduce your risk in the meantime. So I don't want to go too product specific here, but I do want to give you an idea, since most of you on the call are not security experts. I want to give you just a quick flavor for the end-to-end solutions that we offer for that across that software development lifecycle to help you bake it in. So from a developer standpoint, we've got Static Code Analyzer and DevInspect, which are tools that can test the source code right up front in the development. We've got Fortify Web Inspect that's used for working applications. So whether it's pre-production or in production, you would use it on an application as it's running. You could think of that as automated penetration testing. And then, and I should add, there's going to be a whole talk on risky business later this week about why you need both application source code application testing and dynamic application testing, and how it's kind of two sides of the same coin. If you're only looking at one piece or the other, you're not seeing the full story. So you really need both of those. And then on the production side, we've got Application Defender and Fortify On Demand that can help monitor and protect applications in production. And then to help you manage your software security program, Software Security Center is a product that we have that crosses these all of these stages to help you manage that end-to-end program. And Vivid is going to distribute a family brochure, a link to a brochure that in the follow-up here that will give you more information on that. But I did want you to have a flavor for what we offer. And so the first question that you might think of, though, is, well, I don't know what I need. And typically what you need depends upon what you're trying to accomplish. So you really need to start looking with what are you trying to achieve, and based on that, give you a good start on where to look for application security and where to begin, particularly if you're not doing anything or doing very little right now. So the first use case, let's say that you're anxious to shift left, you want to eliminate defects early. you want to enable the developers. And what you need to do there is make sure that whatever tool you provide the developers with, it's built into their native development environment, so into their IDE. If it's not, it becomes like an adjunct process that they may or may not remember to follow, that is kind of seen as something separate from their day job, if you will. So you really want to bake it into their IDE, and it needs to be immediate and provide information to the developer right there as they're writing the code. So let me show you an example of how we do that. The Vivid folks asked me to do some demos, and I didn't really want to launch into a deep dive on any particular area since we're covering the full gamut. But let me give you a flavor here of what that means for the developer. So DevInspect and SCA both have a feature within that called Security Assistant. And when you look at it in DevInspect, it's kind of a lightweight analysis. SCA is more robust, but it's on the it's used by the developer, and what Security Assistant does is you could kind of think of it like a spell checker. So as the developer is typing their code, if they type something that is a clear security vulnerability, it will highlight it right there, give you the explanation, explain, how critical this is, and suggest a way to improve it. That can, ideally, you'd want the developer then to take the steps right there to fix it. In some cases, they won't. It can be tracked so that they can go back and do it in the next sprint or what have you. But in terms of shifting left, having that immediate, insightful feedback, we think can make a huge difference. And the other case would be, let's say your objective is rapid deployments. So you want to deploy much more quickly. You want to move from deploying every quarter to to monthly or to weekly, maybe even daily or hourly. And as you do that, you really need to focus on the production side of things a little bit more, because for a couple reasons. One is you may, as I said, choose to move some vulnerabilities into production. You may also end up with some code out there that you didn't know that you had. I'm sure none of you have shadow IT that you have to worry about, but every now and then a business does deploy a cloud-based application without IT's knowledge. And understanding that that's there, and a quick scan to see what the most critical vulnerabilities is can be really key. Those things are offered through Fortify On Demand as a service called Continuous Application Monitoring. And then on the runtime side, understanding what applications are being exploited or attempted to exploit is really important. It helps you assess how critical a vulnerability is, but by all means, if you see that it's being actually exploited, you would give that a lot more attention to than you would to maybe a test that shows what hypothetically could be done. So when you're looking at it in runtime, you're seeing not only what could be done, but what's really happening. So that gives you that additional insight and confidence to know how important particular vulnerabilities are. And in that runtime environment, runtime application self-protection tools, also commonly referred to as RASP, can go a step further and take action to actually stop the exploits. So it's worth mentioning RASP here. I've got two slides that I just want to explain RASP because it's new to the market in terms of, is it like an emerging segment? Now we've got a product that's been around for 7 years. It's not new, but the use cases evolving around it are new and really giving it new energy in terms of why you need it. And DevOps is a clear use case for why you need RAS. So the way that RAS works is it looks at multiple pieces. It instruments the application's runtime environment and looks at multiple pieces of information to determine if something is an exploit or not. So there are tools out there that only look at input. There are tools that only look at things on the wire. But RAS can look at a SQL injection. It could see a SQL injection and input. It can look at whether that same SQL call is still vulnerable when it goes to the database to know if your application has sanitized it or not. So you're going to have far fewer false positives. It can also look at the output, so cross-site scripting, something like that, particularly a persistent threat that's built up over time and the malware is already injected and you only see the output. If you're not looking at all of these items, you're not getting full insight into what's happening in your application. I'll stop there on the RAS, but if Application Defender is the tool to look at. There's a free trial out there, and you can contact your account manager if you would like some help with that. But the Application Defender website is where you would go for that free trial. And I apologize, I'm a little more passionate about RAS because that's an area of focus for me. But also want to talk about the third use case, which is continuous integration and deployment. So I mentioned from the research that not everybody has reached that brass ring. A lot of people are doing continuous integration with Jenkins. Far fewer people are doing continuous deployment. It really takes a good orchestration across your processes and your tools in order to make that happen. And I don't know if you can read this because screens sometimes get kind of shrunk down, but you'll have the slides. But there are several moving parts to this, and integrating that security testing is really, really key here. And so we're trying to make it easier for you to do that. One way that we're doing that is with the Fortify Ecosystem. So we just launched an ecosystem here online where you can grab things like chef recipes and plugins and RESTful APIs and all of that in order to more seamlessly build in Fortify's application security into your processes. And I'll follow with a website here shortly. Kind of got these out of order here. So let me show you. Here's the website. It's hpe.com/software/Fortify Ecosystem, and there's about 20 things out there so far. We just launched it last week. We'll be adding more all of the time, and if you've got a particular interest in something, I'm sure we would love your feedback there as well. And here's an example. So we've got what we're calling a FOD bot, so Fortify on Demand, a FOD bot with Slack, and we are focusing a lot of effort on all of the chat tools as well because we understand that that's a key part here. In addition to the ecosystem, another way, and this is enabled through the ecosystem, we will be enabling this through the ecosystem, but another thing to think about is if you are using containers as part of your automated deployment, you can build that RASP, our Application Defender is our RASP tool. You can build that straight into the Docker containers so that every infrastructure that is spun up and deployed is already blessed by security, having that agent there for that monitoring and protection. So food for thought. Happy to connect you with some software solution architects if you'd like to look at it more closely for your specific environment. So in conclusion, the right approach for making sure that you are addressing application security within your DevOps is to build it in. Build it in at every stage of the software development lifecycle, from development by enabling the developers to create more secure code, through testing, through automation, baking it into your processes, and in production by continuously monitoring and protecting those apps that you have running. So with that, I think it's time for some questions. Before we go, there's the Fortify website here. While you're collecting some questions, if you would like some more information on the Fortify capabilities for application security. Okay, and Stefan, I know you've got a survey.
Yes, I have. So first of all, I just want to say thank you very much for that, Sandy. That was really interesting. Thoroughly enjoyed that. And over to the people on the call. I really appreciate if you've got any questions that you want to post to Cindy. Just as a reminder, on your GoToWebinar panel, there is an area called questions. If you populate that, and we will look to answer them. Okay, so the first question we've got is from Doug McDormand. Secure configuration management / continuous. How did the leaders do it? And did they use templates such as CIS benchmarks and tools such as OpenSCAP or something else?
So we didn't ask them, and I kind of regret this, we didn't ask them like what recipes and so forth they were using. We asked them, are you using continuous integration or continuous monitoring or continuous deployment? And we asked them what tools they were using, and as I said, the Atlassian tools were very popular, Microsoft tools were very popular. When you look at continuous integration, it was Jenkins, and for deployment, Chef and Puppet, those absolutely bubbled to the top. But we didn't get into the hows of, how they're actually orchestrating those things.
Okay. Thank you for that. And the next question is from Adam. What kind of integration solutions exist to get vulnerabilities found by RASP, etc., into ALM as defects?
Okay. So the integration really, I want to make sure I heard all of that properly. What integration tools exist for RASP in ALM?
Well, it says what kind of integration solutions exist to get, the person's used the abbreviation VULNS, so I'm assuming that's vulnerabilities, found by RASP, etc., into ALM as defects.
Got it. Okay. So
can I add, sorry to cut across that, that's just been further clarified to prevent manual entry into Hpe Alm.
Got it. Yeah, you can absolutely do that without manual entry. So, and it not just from Application Defender, from the RASP, but also from some of the other Fortify products, you can send those defects over to ALM. Now, one of the challenges becomes it sends it to ALM, but there's not a good reflective back on what was fixed. So that becomes a bit of a challenge, but it does absolutely prevent you from entering it manually. In terms of the events and application logs that are found with Application Defender our RASP tool. That can be sent to anything. Stefan, there's a lot of background noise. That can be sent to anything that can read a syslog file or common event format file. So you could send it to your Security Operations Center and have them, correlate it with other things that are going on. You can send it to ALM. You can send it to a log management system. Anything that can consume a syslog file theoretically could take that Application Defender file.
Excellent. So, Cindy, thank you for that. Adam's responded by saying thanks for the answers. So, I think you've covered that really nicely. There's another question here from Doug. Did they describe what metrics they were using to track security in their DevOps process?
Not what metrics, but they did describe that whether or not they were using metrics. And metrics is an important part. And if you're not managing the process, and it becomes very difficult to gather metrics. And that's why I think it's so important that you build application security into the process so that you begin to get some metrics from that as well.
Okay. Thank you, Cindy. So the next question is, before I read out the next question, just as a reminder, if anybody has any more questions, if you could get them in to us now, then we'll have time to ask them. So the next question is from Balaji. It starts, thanks for a great session. What is the recommendation around security scans integration into CI process? And let's clarify that question by saying recommendation around stage gates for code promotion to higher environments.
So if you have a stage gate, then that's a good place to start. But if you don't, or you want to try to eliminate some of the gates and make things more continuous, it really depends upon the processes and tools that you're using. That's probably a good one to take offline with and engage our solution architects to look at what you specifically are using and what you're trying to accomplish.
Lovely, thank you. Balaji's responded with an okay, thanks as well. Okay, that's the. I think we've got one or two more questions just coming in. Let's just give it one moment. Okay, so the next one's from Doug. What tools review the code or scripts in the infrastructure as code?
What tools reveal the infrastructure as a code?
Yeah, I'll repeat that one. It's what tools review the code or scripts. Review the code or scripts in the infrastructure as code.
So I think what you're asking is, how do you, if you're doing software-defined infrastructure, how are you securing your software-defined infrastructure applications? I think is what, if that's what's being asked, you would want to run application security scans on those tools that you're using. Typically, for instance, we use HPE uses Fortify to do security scans for our own third-party applications. So if you're using Application Defender, it's been scanned by the other Fortify products to make sure it doesn't have vulnerabilities, and same for any of the other HPE software. So, am I understanding the question correctly?
I've got no further clarification here. Sorry, we've just had further clarification just come in there. Infrastructure as code means your infrastructure is now scripted code in tools such as Puppet.
Yep.
Okay.
It means spinning up an environment on the fly. So instead of partitioning a server and doing things very manually, it's kind of like what you do if you spin up a cloud environment in AWS or Azure. You define the parameters of what you're looking for, and your infrastructure is delivered immediately.
Yeah, so I think the question is how do you scan those scripts that deploy your infrastructure?
Yeah, just as you would any other third-party application.
Perfect. Okay, as far as I can see now, that is the last of the questions. Cindy, any last words from yourself, and I'll wrap up at this point.
No, Stefan, thank you. I appreciate the time and the opportunity to share with the Vivit members what I think is a very important topic of application security, and how developers and IT operations and everyone really has a role here. I would encourage you to go learn as much as you can about how it's being practiced in your enterprise, and see what you can do to improve it.
Lovely, thank you, Cindy, and thank you for your time and effort in this. I'd also like to thank all of you for attending today's webinar. Just as a reminder, please be sure to complete the short survey after the webinar. So this is a survey about the webinar in itself, and opt in to receive more information from Hewlett Packard Enterprise. The next one is to remind you that the webinar has been recorded, and the recording and slide deck will be posted to the Vivit website. And then the next few days you will receive an email with links to those, so it will be easy to find. And then a final reminder to take a look at the public state of security DevOps survey that Cindy has mentioned. The link will be posted in Vivit and is in the slide deck, and I'd thoroughly encourage you to do that. And it just remains for me to say thank you to everybody, and I look forward to you guys joining us at the next webinar from Vivit. Thank you.